Good morning, everyone. Welcome this morning. Welcome to our series on engaging classroom discussions. Today is the first session in a three-part series. Today's session is on planning and facilitating online discussions. Our presenter today is Rachel Krieger. Rachel's background is in teaching and learning. She started her career as a public school teacher and earned her graduate degree in educational technology from Michigan State before coming to the University of Michigan. She's been at the University of Michigan for 5 years, and she works as a learning and teaching with technology consultant for LSA. Some housekeeping before we get started, though. So today we have two moderators. I'm Terry Horton. I work with Rachel, and Genevieve White, my colleague, will be moderating today. So if you have any questions, if you can put those in the Q&A tool there at the bottom of your screen, then Rachel's going to take a break in the middle, and Genevieve and I can ask her the questions. At the end of the session too, we'll open it up, and if you'd like to, we can unmute you at that time and you can ask some questions and we'll have some conversation. We are recording the session today, so I'm going to follow up with an email with a link to the video and Rachel's slides. And if she has any other resources, I know a lot of the links that she has, they're on the slide, so you'll be able to access those from her slideshow. And I also wanted to point out that you should see the closed captions running at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom right, if you want to remove those, if you don't want to see those, you'll have some options, some viewing options, or if you want to see those in a different form, you can change that there. Okay, so let's get to it. Rachel.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for attending today. I'm happy to have you here on this Friday morning. Like Terry said, my name is Rachel Krieger. I'm one of the instructional consultants with LSA Technology Services. And she also mentioned that this is the first session that's part of a three-part seminar series all about engaging classroom discussions. Today, we're going to be focusing on the planning and facilitating of those classroom discussions. And then the next one coming up on November 20th, that's going to be specifically about refining online discussions and the various tools that might be available to you at U of M and through LSNA. And then the last session in the series will be December 4th, and that will be interactive discussion strategies. So if you haven't signed up or registered for the following two sessions in the series, I provided the link at the bottom there. You can go to the TTC site where you registered for this session and register for those two also if you are interested. All right, so for today's, let's go back here. For today's objectives, what are we going to be covering? We're going to be covering planning for discussions, facilitating those discussions, and then how to better foster student participation within discussions. The overall strategies and best practices that we're going to cover today, they can be applied for both in-person and online, even hybrid types of learning scenarios. They might need to be tweaked kind of a little bit here or there, whether they're in person or online, but kind of overall, they can be applied to, all of those different possible teaching scenarios. So planning for discussions. The first thing to kind of think about is that great discussions require careful planning. And that's kind of all of what our session is all about today, careful planning for our discussions. Discussions are a really great way to enhance student engagement. They provide avenues for exploration, and they really encourage some democratic habits with our students. However, they can be very anxiety producing for the instructors. By nature, they're very unpredictable, and they require you as the instructor to kind of surrender a lot of control. But fortunately, that can kind of be alleviated with some careful planning and being able to have some lively and meaningful discussions in your classrooms. When planning a discussion, you do really want to consider cognitive, social, emotional, and physical factors that can either hinder or foster the exchange of ideas in your classroom. So the very first thing that you want to do when planning for discussions, this is going to happen well before coming into the classroom and actually having that specific discussion. This is going to be something that you want to do from the very beginning, at the very first class that you have. You want to start establishing principles and ground rules for discussion very, very early on. It's really important to create a climate of trust, of respect, of acceptance, so that students feel comfortable enough to be able to share their ideas, especially if they are ideas that are of, an opposing position as another student, or a viewpoint or perspective that is different from others in the classroom. It's also important to let students know that we all have something to share. We all have something to learn from one another. And so we want to encourage students to participate in as many ways as they can. And that may not always look like a whole class discussion. Each student is going to have different personalities, different levels of confidence. And so you want to really make sure that you are providing multiple ways in which students can participate in a discussion and in your classroom. So that may look like a whole class discussion at times. Other times you might have small group or partner discussions, or an online discussion to kind of supplement what you're talking about in class, so that those students can continue. Oh, let's see. I think all of a sudden something went out of presenter mode. All right, let's flip through that again. Okay. So after kind of establishing those core principles and ground rules for discussions in your classroom, it's important to think about a clear goal or an objective that you want to have for the classroom. So what do you want students to get out of the discussion? And how is this discussion going to connect to your larger overall course objectives and goals? And determining the mode of discussion. So there are lots of ways that we can have discussions, especially right now with a lot of classes being fully remote or being, in a hybrid situation. Having an in-person discussion, perhaps having more of a face-to-face discussion, but over Zoom with breakout rooms, or having an online discussion with some of the discussion tools that are available, like Canvas discussions or Yellow Dig or Harmonize. So it's important to determine how that discussion is going to take place and which of those modes is going to work best for what you want the students to get out of that discussion. So then thinking about determine how you're actually going to get that discussion going. And there are a ton of different ways to actually go about having a discussion, whether it be in person or online. So I'm just going to share a couple of kind of popular discussion methods. So the first one, the Socratic seminar method, this is kind of your traditional classroom discussion that you see a lot. The instructor is going to ask a question, an open-ended question, perhaps about a particular reading or a video or a topic that was already discussed in class, and is going to encourage students to kind of think critically about that topic or question and be able to have that conversation with other students in the class. The fishbowl. So the fishbowl is going to allow students to kind of play two separate roles in the discussion. You're going to have two circles or two groups of students where they're going to take turns participating actually in the discussion, and then also participating as an active listener in the discussion. So the first circle, the inner circle, will consist of the active participants actually discussing and sharing their thoughts and ideas, while the second circle, the outside circle, is going to be listening in. And they also might be completing a particular task, like completing a worksheet or something like that, that's going to kind of keep them engaged in the discussion. In the fishbowl, the instructor is kind of going to take a step back a little bit, interject when they need to, but for the most part, it's going to be the students who are kind of leading that discussion, who are in that center circle. And then a jigsaw. So a jigsaw, I've actually participated in quite a few jigsaw discussion activities. And this one is where students are going to work in small groups. And those small groups, they're going to actually have two small groups that they're going to be working in. The first small group that they're going to be a part of, they're all going to be learning and becoming experts about a particular topic that they're assigned. And then after they have kind of become those experts on that topic, they're then going to divide into another group and be reshuffled with a representative in each group from the first set of groups. And so that second group, there's going to be someone who is an expert on various topics, and they're going to then share that information out with the other students in their group so that they can learn from one another about the other topics that the other groups were kind of becoming experts on. Another kind of discussion activity would be a think, pair, share. And this works really well for students who maybe are a little bit more hesitant, to speak up in a large class setting, or perhaps maybe with topics that are a little bit more sensitive. This might be a good way to go. And so think, pair, share, students are going to first work individually, the think part. They might, think quietly, jot down notes in their notebook, and then they're going to get together with a partner, turning and talking to maybe the person next to them, sharing their ideas, comparing their ideas, and then finally being able as a partnership to share out those ideas to the rest of the class. So it at least gives the students a little bit of time to kind of think about, to generate their ideas, and feel confident in sharing those with the rest of the class. And then finally, another example would be perhaps an informal debate where you group students according to either a pro or a con position about a particular topic, and ask the groups to kind of formulate various arguments or examples for that particular position. And then once they've kind of discussed and kind of came up with those ideas within their group, then they can have those groups share out to the rest of the class about their argument or their pro or con for that particular position. Now, this is just a couple of ideas. There are, a lot of other examples. I know in our third session, we're going to be talking about some other teaching strategies and active learning strategies that go along with discussions. But I just wanted to mention a couple of these today to get you thinking about various types of discussions that you could have. So then after you kind of have determined how you want to have the discussion, what your goals for the discussion are going to be, you're going to want to think about how are you actually going to open the discussion? How are you going to set the tone for that discussion? It could be possibly sharing a video that the students are going to watch before they're going to start having their discussion. Maybe it is a reading that they had to do before coming to class. Perhaps maybe you want to share your experience about a particular topic to get students kind of all on the same page in order to enter that discussion. So you definitely want to make sure you are clarifying and making clear what the objective is for the discussion for the students. And then thinking about how that's going to be introduced to the class in kind of an exciting way for them. And then thinking about how are you going to prepare the students for the discussion. So again, just like how you were going to open the discussion, perhaps preparing the students would be giving them a reading, a text, or a short video that they needed to watch before coming to class, so that everyone has a shared understanding about a particular issue or topic that you want them to talk about. Another way to prepare students is perhaps to have them generate some topics or questions before coming to class, and then sharing those out and discussing those with one another. Perhaps you create a list or generate a list of questions, the questions that you're going to be planning as part of the planning process, sharing that out with your students ahead of time so that they have some kind of quiet time before coming to class to think about their stance on a particular topic or analyze a particular text, and they can kind of jot down some of their ideas and be able to come to class feeling more prepared to actually participate in that discussion. If the students feel more prepared, just like you as the instructor feel more prepared, they're going to be more likely to speak up and participate and share their ideas with their peers. And then finally, you're going to need to plan your questions or your prompts. So that's a little bit larger of a topic. So planning some thought-provoking questions. How do we go about doing that? So the first thing we really want to kind of keep an eye on is making sure that you are asking open-ended questions. We want to make sure that you're avoiding questions that are either right or wrong, or that are yes or no. We really want to choose questions that are going to encourage multiple viewpoints, invite students to kind of share their opinions, share their experiences or interactions with others, their unique perspectives that they may have that no one else in the class does. And this can really generate additional topics or define critical issues. Discussion is really all about exploration. And so we really want to make sure that you are designing your questions to be open-ended so that students aren't kind of put down a particular path in order to answer their question. Be relevant. So, especially today with, everything political that's happening, the worldwide pandemic, it's very important to make sure that discussions are relevant to their own personal lives and to what's happening out in the world. That's going to help them to invest more in the discussion and be able to pull their own experiences into that and be able to kind of make more sense of the topic and why it's relevant and why it's even important that we're learning about this topic in the first place. We want to ask questions that are going to ask students to reflect on their own thinking and learning experiences. So kind of going back to open-ended questions, being relevant, we really want to consider asking questions that are going to encourage students to relate more on a personal level. How does a particular author appeal to a contemporary audience? Or, did you relate to any of the characters' struggles that they were going through? Does that character remind you of anybody? So really thinking about questions that are going to allow the students to kind of dig deeper into their personal lives in order to share a response. And then determine what you want your students to do and how you want them to walk away from learning that particular question. What do you want them to be able to do? And know what type of question is going to allow that to happen. So it's important for us to know what types of questions are going to elicit certain responses. And I like to refer to Bloom's taxonomy for that to help determine what types of questions to ask. So particular introductory questions, those are going to ask students more to recall factual information. Whereas some higher order thinking questions may ask students to apply or analyze or evaluate a particular topic or issue. So we do have up on the Technology Services website, we do kind of have a graphic that I like to refer to for Bloom's taxonomy. It has there the different orders of thinking, from lower level to higher level thinking, from remembering all the way up to creating. And so there's some different descriptions of what students would be doing at each of those levels, and then some words to kind of help you generate some questions that you want the students to be doing. Now I was, in preparation for this session, I was going through and kind of trying to find examples of various types of questions that would meet some of these different higher order thinking. And as I was coming across some various different question types on the web, I did come across a document, I believe it was from CRLT here at U of M, and they had a lot of different question types. And so I kind of took a lot of examples from that, and I did link that document in the resources so you can take a better look at that. And I'm not going to go in detail with every single question because there are a lot of them here, but I just want to give you an idea of what some of those various question types might be. So an analysis type of question, questions beginning with why, how would you explain a particular topic? Why is it important? What's the meaning of it? Really getting at the students to be able to find the analysis of something, kind of dig deeper. Compare and contrast. So be able to think about the difference between perhaps two various readings or two different topics that they're learning about. How are they similar? How are they different? Cause and effect. So what are the causes and what are the results of that? What are the connections between two different topics? Clarification. So what is meant by what perhaps the author is talking about in a text, or being able to explain how something works or why they think something works. And a hypothetical question. So hypothetical questions, they're really great to allow students to be creative and be imaginative. For example, if your material is science-based, you could ask students to perhaps imagine a world that is with or without a particular phenomenon. For example, what would the world be like if there wasn't gravity? Moral and ethical dilemmas. So provide students with a problem or a particular situation where they can explore that a little bit more morally and ethically. This type of prompt really helps students with thinking about a particular topic, giving them kind of a broader understanding of the topic and being able to have them prepare for the discussion and be able to form various opinions based on kind of what they've researched or what they've what their values are in their own life. And then assess, diagnose, and act. So in here, the assess or the assessment part would be what is the issue or the problem at hand. And then the diagnosis, what is the root cause of the issue or the problem? And then the action, how can we solve the particular issue that we do have on hand? And this type of question is going to help students thinking through the problem-solving process. Conceptual changes, so introduce students to a new concept or an idea, ask them to kind of perhaps research that topic or idea, find common misconceptions about that topic, and then be able to explain that or teach that to someone else. Personal exploration, so letting students explore a new topic kind of on their own terms. This kind of gives them the creative freedom to be able to help find their authentic voice. Here's kind of some examples. What does a particular topic mean to you? Find an example of that either in your own life or in a reading. Questions like this really help encourage students to be kind of curious about a particular topic that interests them. And then significance. What is the long-term effect of a particular problem? And, is there something more important that we should be considering about something? We take a step back and kind of look at new theories about a particular book or character, perhaps. Connections. So does this, remind you of anything that we've studied or seen before? Have you experienced a similar problem? So really allowing them to make connections between topics that they're learning in class or a topic that you're learning and something that's happening out in the real world, being able to make that connection. And then finally, points of view. So whose point of view are we actually hearing? Whose perhaps point of view is left out? Getting students to kind of think about different perspectives or viewpoints about a particular topic. All right, so like I said, all of those various question types, I didn't want to go into too much detail or examples about them because there were a lot, but I do have some links on my resources page if you want to kind of dive deeper into those various question types. I have some of those resources linked for you. So we're about kind of midway through here at about 10:30. So I'm going to pause for a moment. If there are any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. Or if you've already put some questions in the chat, Terry or Genevieve will kind of let me know and we can answer some of those now. If not, please, put your questions into the chat. At the end of the session today, we will have more of kind of a live Q&A if you want to actually ask your question live.
Rachel, there's a question asking, are there examples of the activities going back to like the fishbowl and the jigsaw? Are there examples of them being conducted and or when you would use different activities in what situations? Do you have some links in there?
So I do have some links. And we do have on our website in the teaching strategies, and I do have that specific link on our website in the resources, but we have kind of a whole section on active learning activities, and all of those discussion activities that I talked about at the beginning, they're all listed on that page with some specific examples and when you might use those various kind of discussion methods.
Yeah, and I'll add the link to the email because you'll see the name of the activity, and when you click on the drop down, it gives you the description and then it explains how it was used in an actual college classroom. Now that was pre-remote learning, so none of them are going to be, well, maybe some of them are online based. But there's another question asking.
And I know, Terry, before you move on to that one, I know I was just talking to an instructor who wanted to use the jigsaw activity for discussion with her students, but she was teaching kind of hybrid and going kind of completely remote towards the end of the semester. And so we were kind of thinking through how she might be able to do that type of discussion online. And kind of what we've came up with was using Zoom breakout rooms and using a discussion board. And so the students would use the discussion board or a Canvas group site to kind of work together as a group to become experts on a particular topic. And then they would go into Zoom breakout rooms with the second group to kind of share out what they learned and what they were an expert on. So that's kind of just one example of how you might take a jigsaw activity and be able to do that in an online environment.
That was actually the next question. And that's a really
Oh,
good
good.
example because I know people are starting to do that. They've done it in discussion, in like the Canvas discussions before. And it does take manually moving students around. So you have to group them first and then you have to regroup them. If it's a small class, you can do it. But you're saying that what they did was they started in a discussion forum. And then when they scrambled, like put all the A's together, all the B's together, that they did that in a Zoom breakout.
Correct. Yep.
So it just takes planning and you would have to do that manually, but it still could be done in smaller classes. What size was the class?
I want to say it was maybe around 45.
Okay.
Yeah, 40 to 45.
So doable, doable. Okay, good. And then another question, is there a question type that comes from students themselves? Students could upvote questions from other students and discuss those.
Yeah, so student generated questions would definitely be a good way to go. Having students be able to kind of think about a question is going to get them to think deeper about a particular topic. Coming up with discussion questions that are open-ended and that are going to get at some of those higher order thinking it isn't easy to do. And so, by having students generate those questions on their own, they're going to be thinking more deeply about the topic in itself by doing that activity, and then sharing those out with the rest of the class and actually discussing those student generated questions is going to even get more ideas kind of flowing and perhaps maybe other topics, kind of coming to the surface to talk about.
Okay. I think that's all the questions for now.
Okay. All right. Well, again, if you have more questions as we continue, please put them in the chat, or if you want to save them to the end and ask them yourself, you are more than welcome to do so. All right. So now that we've kind of thought about planning for our discussions, we're going to kind of switch gears and actually talk about facilitating those discussions. And so facilitating those discussions, there's kind of two parts: facilitating during the discussion, and then kind of wrapping up or closing the discussion at the end of the class. So during the discussion, kind of some helpful tips, best practices, get to know your students and use their names as often as possible. And I know this can be more difficult if you have a large class, but even with a large class, try your best. Get to know your students. Perhaps at the beginning of the term, do kind of an icebreaker type of discussion to allow yourself to get to know the students better, to allow the students to get to know each other better. Even knowing that they have a particular hobby, or maybe they're majoring in the same thing, having that one little thing that they can build and have a connection with someone else is going to make them feel more comfortable. And by using their names in the discussion, calling on them by name, maybe using their name to rephrase something that they said, is going to allow them to feel like their contribution was heard, and that it was valuable, not only to you, but to the other students as well. And then repeating key points that the students make to help clarify for other students in the class who maybe had a hard time hearing, or maybe it was confusing and they needed to kind of hear it again in a different way. But also to make sure that what you're understanding the student is saying is correct, what it is that they're actually trying to say. And so I know that as you're repeating some of these key points, it's really helpful to perhaps say, what I hear you saying is, and then kind of rephrasing or restating that. And then they'll be able to say, yes, that is exactly what I was trying to say, or no, actually, I was trying to say this instead, instead of just assuming that they were trying to say it a particular way. Pausing after asking a question. So this concept of wait time, waiting and allowing 10 to about 20 seconds of wait time after asking a question really allows students to kind of have that opportunity to think a little bit deeper about a topic, be able to maybe remember an experience. Sometimes it's kind of hard to just think of an answer right on the spot 1 second after the question was asked. And so having those couple of seconds to kind of stop, think about it, generate their question, and then be able to answer it. It helps students who are a little bit more shy or quiet or hesitant. It gives them more time to kind of formulate their answers and be able to share them. I know with wait time, sometimes it can be a little awkward if no one is saying anything, but I do promise if you wait through that silence, someone will speak up and talk, and it will be valuable. Modeling, active learning and expected discussion behavior. So this is really important, that the behavior of the instructor is going to play a huge role in the tone of the course. You should be regularly showing appreciation for student comments, giving positive feedback, even giving some constructive feedback. Providing that feedback is going to show them, and demonstrate for them how to actually have some back and forth conversation and discussions. Showing students that although you may have an opposing viewpoint from a student, that's okay, that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to share ideas or listen to someone or learn from someone who has a different perspective and viewpoint. And if they see you doing that, they're going to be more likely to do that as well. I know a lot of students may also come, from a background where they didn't have anyone to model that kind of expected behavior. Maybe they didn't have a ton of opportunities in high school to have those type of respectful and open discussions. And so, having you model that may be the first time that some of your students might be seeing that. And so really modeling that active listening and participation is going to play a huge role in your course. So decentralizing the discussion by encouraging students to talk to one another. So not necessarily having yourself ask a question or give a prompt. The students are responding to you. You ask another question, another student responds. You kind of want to get away from that decentralized discussion, and you want the students to kind of turn and talk to one another. And so, if that doesn't happen organically, you can use kind of a rotating chair strategy in which students kind of call on each other instead of you calling on them. And so kind of getting into that habit of, after a student is done talking, to kind of turn and call on another student who may be interested in talking rather than you doing that as the instructor. Prevent the discussion from turning into a heated argument. So of course, arguments can be productive. You can have arguments that don't get heated and that are successful, but sometimes discussions can get overheated where students are, feeling very particular or heated about a particular topic and they get angry. And so really thinking about how to diffuse those arguments among students, especially if you're talking about a sensitive or a kind of a hot topic in the classroom, and really just kind of pulling it back and reminding the students of, what were the ground rules that we talked about and set at the beginning of the class, and also reminding the students that, we have a lot to learn from people who have different or opposing viewpoints. And so just because they disagree or have a different viewpoint than you, it doesn't mean that we can't learn from them to kind of expand our perspectives as well. And I did see on the CRLT's website, they do have a ton of great resources specifically for this topic of sensitive and hot topics. I did link in the resources page some of their resources that are there. They have some tips and tricks, and then they also have some specific guidelines for various topics. So if you're interested in that or kind of need to think through that, CRLT has some great resources for that. Taking notes throughout the discussion. So this is important to take notes to summarize, be able to summarize at the end of the discussion. And we'll kind of talk about that with closing, having some closure with the discussion. But if you're kind of just jotting down notes, kind of taking account of things, particular viewpoints or ideas that were either maybe really interesting or kind of different, or the point that you really wanted to drive home, kind of take note of that and take note of who made those comments, and that will help and make it a lot easier at the end of the session to kind of be able to summarize and kind of share out that you actually heard what people were saying. And then also keeping in mind, I feel like at least I have always learned that when having a conversation with someone, that you should make eye contact with them to let them know that you're talking or that you're listening. Having that eye contact in a conversation is important. But to also know that not everyone is comfortable with direct eye contact. And not every ethnicity or culture is comfortable with direct eye contact. And so to just be very mindful of this and not, to make eye contact, briefly, but to not perhaps maybe make eye contact the entire time that they're talking, kind of scan the room for other people, who might be interested in talking next, or, making sure that other people are listening is really helpful. Of course, in an online environment, that's not going to be as much of an issue or something that you need to think about. But in an in-person class, definitely kind of be mindful of that. And then to also utilize facilitating questions or follow-up questions. So this is really going to help a discussion kind of proceed in the right direction. You want to make sure that you are asking these facilitating questions as the discussion is actually happening. And it's a little harder to plan for what those questions are going to be, because you never know what the students are going to say or what ideas they're going to come up with. But there are some various types of facilitating questions that we can kind of be mindful of, so we can kind of draw on those when it is time for us to actually ask a follow-up question. So the first one is a prompting question. So prompting will help students organize their thoughts, maybe make some connections, perhaps maybe, what is the author's position on this paper? So maybe the student is talking about a particular author, talking about a particular paper, but prompting them to kind of get a little deeper, or prompting them to actually get at the question that you're asking if they're not quite there yet. Justifying questions. So this would require the students to provide evidence for their opinion or their argument. So this will really, again, help the students kind of make more connections, be able to kind of put some evidence behind what it is that they are talking about, be able to provide examples either from their life or from a reading or a text that they read in class. Clarifying question, so be able to check on comprehension, verify that they're actually understanding a particular topic or theory or particular problem, an issue. Comparative questions, so to establish some links, some connections between what's being talked about during the discussion and the material that's being covered in class or in lecture, being able to make a connection to students' experiences. and then extension questions. So extension questions, these would help the students kind of explore the implications of their responses and provide additional explanations. So again, to kind of allow them to kind of think a little bit deeper or more broadly about a particular topic that they're talking about. All right, so after the discussion is over, once it's time to kind of wrap up, we definitely want to, there are some things that we want to think about. And one might be asking the students for a final question. This could maybe set the stage for the next discussion or maybe the next lecture that they're going to be coming to. It could be a good way to help students relate the discussion to other content areas in the course or, other things that they're learning in other classes. Summarize and bring the discussion to a closure. So, ask the class, are there any final comments? Are there any questions before really pulling all of their ideas together? Your kind of closing marks of that discussion are going to show the students how the discussion kind of has progressed from the beginning to the end. Maybe look back at your notes, pick 2 or 3 key points and try to kind of tie those into the overall theme of the discussion. It's also, important to acknowledge some insightful comments that students made, calling them out by name, saying, oh, hey, Terry made a really great comment today, and reiterating what that was, kind of summarizing what that was. Providing this closure is going to be critical for ensuring that the group can leave feeling satisfied and that they actually accomplished and learned something today from the discussion. Perhaps asking the students to reflect, and this could be done in a number of ways, but one way could be a 1-minute paper. It's super, super simple, super fast, right at the end of the class period. Asking the students to write about, maybe how their thinking had changed based on the discussion, or how the discussion fits into the context of, previously discussed issues in the class. Have students, jot this down on just a scrap piece of paper, and then turn it into you as they leave the class. Connect back to your discussion and your learning goal. So tell the students, what they have accomplished during the discussion, and what you're going to expect of them from the next lecture discussion, and how that all ties into the overall objective of the course. Finally, make yourself accessible to them after class. Often students are going to have lingering questions. Maybe there was a topic that you were talking about that kind of struck them the wrong way, or maybe it was a sensitive topic for them and they just might not be finished with the conversation. And so make yourself available to them. That could be after class where they could speak to you for a couple of minutes. It could be by email. Perhaps you have an online discussion board that they could continue having a discussion on. Maybe they drop by your office hours, but just letting them know that you're there if they want to continue that conversation or have a question or more to say about that. And then finally, conduct your own informal evaluation of the discussion. How do you feel the discussion went? Did you achieve your learning goal? Did the students discuss the topics that you wanted them to? Did the discussion kind of go off the rails? Did you have to really kind of pull them back, and why? Maybe what went wrong in the discussion? Was there a place in the discussion where you could have kind of brought them back on topic? Could you have asked a better prompt or question to kind of get them thinking or motivated? So it's always good to kind of evaluate how the discussion went as a whole, and then how you did as the instructor, being the moderator and facilitator of that discussion. All right, so fostering student participation. So this is the kind of the last thing that we're going to talk about today. Being able to get more students to participate in your discussions. You know, a lot of times I'll talk with instructors and they have, you know, well intentions of having, you know, these lively, meaningful discussions, and then not a lot of students speak up or want to share or aren't comfortable with sharing. So how do we get them to participate more? Creating an inclusive discussion environment. So that kind of goes back to the very first thing we talked about, of creating some shared principles and ground rules on having a discussion, making them feel safe in an environment where they can trust one another, where they can feel respected by one another. This is really going to allow students to open up and be more willing to share their ideas. Allow students to ask questions and share anonymously. Now, this is super easy if you are using an online discussion board. Most online discussion tools are going to have the ability for students to post anonymously. Some of them allow instructors to kind of turn that feature on or off, whether they're going to allow the students to post anonymously, but it's an option. In the classroom, it's a little bit harder for students to be able to participate anonymously. So a good way to do that would be perhaps to pass around note cards during an in-class session and have those students who maybe aren't as comfortable talking about a particular topic or sharing their ideas can jot those questions down on the note cards and turn those into you after class. So they can still feel like their ideas and their voices being heard, but doesn't have to feel like everyone is staring at them while they're doing that. Facilitate smaller discussions among students before you ask them to share with the entire class. And so, you know, this provides time for students to think. So even if your, you know, overall goal is to have a whole class discussion, you know, it might be beneficial to, you know, break into small groups or into partners to kind of think about and formulate ideas before coming together as a class and actually holding that whole class discussion. By being able to kind of generate or confirm some of their ideas or beliefs about a particular topic with just one other person that they might feel comfortable with in the class, they'll then be able to feel more comfortable sharing that with everyone. Using Canvas or another online discussion tool to extend the class discussion. So this will allow the discussion to happen even after the discussion in class has ended. And so just like we talked about providing opportunities to be accessible to the students after class, this is a great way to do that. And in addition, to be able to have students you know, continue having that conversation and allowing them to know that the conversation doesn't have to end just because the class period has ended. And then positively reinforcing student contributions. So making sure that you're emphasizing and restating their comments, you know, perhaps writing their ideas on the board, making connections with their comments, making connections between various students' comments, maybe that they're similar or that they're different, and why are they different? Using kind of if you're in the classroom, using nonverbal cues or gestures like smiling or head nodding to kind of let the students know that you're actually listening to what they're saying and that you're actually interested in what they're saying. That silence in the room is okay. So this kind of goes back to that idea of having wait time, pausing for that 10 to 20 seconds after you ask a question. You know, even having wait time or pausing after another student has talked before another student kind of jumps in. It's okay to have silence. Just because it's silent doesn't mean that the conversation is over, doesn't mean that the discussion has kind of come to a lull. It just might mean that students are trying to think about what other students have said and how they might want to respond. Try limiting your own involvement. So kind of avoid the temptation to talk too much, or respond to every student's contribution. After you ask a question, wait, ask the students a question if you really want or think that they'll be able to answer it. Be willing to wait for them to do that. And encourage students to develop their own ideas and respond to one another, rather than you constantly jumping in and being kind of the head of the discussion. And then balance student voices during the discussion. So there's a couple of ways to help do that. Discourage students who monopolize the discussion. You could do this by implementing a structured activity that requires each member of a smaller group to be involved. Avoid eye contact with that one student who might try to monopolize the whole conversation, or perhaps assigning a specific role to the student who kind of dominates that discussion. Have them be kind of the discussion note taker or recorder, rather than you taking those notes during the discussion. That might help them to kind of still be able to share their ideas, but just not dominate the whole discussion. Draw quieter students into the discussion by posing non-threatening questions that maybe don't require as detailed of a response. Maybe assign them a specific task to that student as well. Sitting next to that student, or constantly looking over and smiling might reassure them that, we want to hear your voice, and we want to hear what you have to say. And then clarifying any confusing student contributions it is helpful. Rephrasing, explaining the comment, asking that student to possibly rephrase what they were saying by kind of eliminating any confusion of what the students are going to say, are going to help to balance out those voices in the discussion. So the last thing to think about with fostering student participation is group roles, small group roles. So assign small group roles within a discussion can really encourage positive interdependence and interaction within small group discussions. So some examples of what those small group discussion roles might be. One student may be the facilitator or the encourager in the group. This student would, kind of move the discussion along if no one is talking, maybe ask questions of other students, kind of probe them with some of those encouraging questions that you might do as the facilitator in a whole class discussion. A timekeeper, so someone in the small group who's going to keep the group on track. Make sure that they're covering the right amount of material that they should and discussing all of the questions that they should be in the given amount of time. And then the summarizer. So it's often good to have one of the students who is doing the summarizing, kind of doing the note taking. The summarizer could also be the person who kind of shares out to the larger group once it's time to meet back together as a whole class. The reflector, the student who kind of listens to what other students are saying, being able to kind of explain it back in their own words, asking the original speaker, if that interpretation is correct, so that I hear what you're saying is, and kind of repeating that back for the other students in the group. And then the elaborator, so the person who seeks connections between the discussion and past topics or overall themes in the course. So those are various, group discussion roles that you could give students to kind of help them, participate a little bit more and feel more comfortable sharing and participating in the group. So we've come to the end. We're right a little bit before, a minute before 11. So I will stay on to answer any questions that you have right now. If we, don't have time for your question, we will follow up in an email after the session as well. And I will put it on, here is the slide with all of the additional resources. There's a couple of books listed there that are very helpful. And then the rest of them are all links to online resources, some of them being at U of M, and then some being other resources that I found out on the web. And then I'll leave it on this slide, which is our contact information.
Rachel, we have a great question.
Mm-hmm.
It's asking, any way we could coordinate some practice sessions on the different discussion techniques in the online environment? Seeing how they play out in real time over Zoom would make me feel more comfortable trying it myself.
Absolutely. So the very first thing that you see there is support for LSA instructors. So speak with an LSA learning consultant. So myself, a lot of my colleagues are on the call today too. Any one of us can meet with you and kind of talk to you about these various discussion techniques, all of the different, discussion types that you might want to practice or play out. You can email us at LSA Technology Services. I did put our phone number and our office there because normally we are in the office, and you can just stop by or you can call, but because we're working remotely right now, email is the best way to kind of get a hold of us. But absolutely, we are happy to help you and work through that with you.
And Rachel, what would you recommend for those of us that understand the ideas but don't necessarily know how to implement them? Would you recommend that they reach out to us, or is it best to start with the resources? What would be a good starting place?
If they kind of understand kind of everything that we've gone through today, but they're just not quite sure how to kind of get started or how that might actually look in their classroom, I would say definitely contact us, and we will work with you to talk about those things.